Start here. All right, everyone. Well, it's good to see you. It is another Tuesday night here. We are back with our weekly apologetic meetings. My name is Eric Chabot. A lot of you already know me. You've been here before. And we do this actually locally at Kennesaw State University and Columbia Community College. But as you all know, we cannot necessarily meet on the campus right now. We can do some things on the campus, do some outreach, but we can't necessarily meet in the classroom. So we've been doing these meetings weekly. And we appreciate the opportunity to be here. So we've had a lot of good scholars on over the last year, a lot of good topics. And so tonight, this is a really interesting topic, and I'm excited about this. We have a guest, Dr. Steve Miller, who's actually associate philosophy professor at Kennesaw State. That's near Atlanta. I actually know a couple guys that led an apologetics chapter there. They've graduated, so we know mutual people. And so we're excited to be able to do this with Dr. Miller. And he has written a very interesting book on near-death experiences. Now, ironically, out of all the apologetic topics we've done, we've never really done this topic. I've researched this a little bit. I read some of the works by Gary Habermas, some other people, J.P. Moreland, some other people. But you know, it's if I muted you, Dr. Miller, just unmute yourself if you can hear me. I muted everyone. Are you still muted, Steve? Just unmute yourself if you're still muted. Okay, yeah, I have to mute everyone. But anyway, so let me show you his book real quickly here. I'm going to go to share the screen here, and we'll take a look at it. So he has this book that he is so willfully and not being very kind to give us a PDF of. If you got the email, if you didn't get the email about the PDF, he passed this along to us, the PDF of his book. But you can email me later, put your name in the chat room, or I'll put my name later, and you can get the PDF. But he is so gracious to give us a copy of this book, because I told him these meetings are a lot of times it's about just equipping people. And he was very generous to do that. So this is the book, Near-Death Experiences as Evidence for the Existence of God in Heaven. This book was endorsed by J.P. Moreland, and that's a big endorsement, because J.P. Moreland is an expert on some of the issues with the soul and, of course, many other topics in philosophy. So I encourage you to get this book. If not, email me, get the PDF, but I got the Kindle version for myself. Sold a lot of copies, looks like, or no, it's got a lot of reviews. I don't know what copies, but it certainly has a lot of reviews on Amazon. I just want to mention something else. He has a couple other books that are very interesting. I found this book, Why Brilliant People Believe Nonsense, to be a very relevant book for today's world. So I encourage you to get this book as well. Why Brilliant People Believe Nonsense, a practical text for critical and creative thinking. And boy, do we need that today. So I want to
mention
really
something on that.
What's that?
Can I mention something on that?
Sure, absolutely.
That one is also available as a free PDF. If you Google Why Brilliant People Believe Nonsense, it's about a 450-page book. And then Steve Miller, the letter J, Steve Miller, and Kennesaw State Digital Commons. I've got it up there for free for people, so people download it all over the world. But yeah, I think this is a huge thing. When we talk about things like this, basically we're sifting evidence. And to me, even in college, we're just not taught this very well. And none of my students coming from high school, hardly any, are aware of logical fallacies. But beyond that, just sifting evidence, doing research. So it's free. And if any professors want to use a chapter or two like they do at KSU, feel free.
Yeah, it's a great book. I appreciate it. I've gotten through some of it, and I can tell you it's really needed. We homeschool our kids, so they get logic in homeschooling. But the university, unfortunately, a lot of kids that come in there, students that just don't have a background that. And then you have this other book about Richard Dawkins back when he had his God delusion. So you wrote a little response to that. If anyone's interested in that book, The God Delusion sold a gazillion copies, millions and millions of copies, and made Richard Dawkins a rich man, but there's been more than enough responses to them. So I appreciate you coming out with a response to that. So let's go ahead and go back to the screen here. Let me just get out of here and we'll go back here. Okay. All right. So let's start out here. So tell us, what was it about this topic specifically? I know you had a background in some apologetic issues, but what was it that got you interested in this very topic alone? Like, why pursue this one? You did your doctoral work on this, by the way?
No, I did my PhD actually on deathbed experiences,
Okay.
which really needed to be brought together because it's not been talked about as much as near-death experiences. But
Okay.
going back, when I was in high school, I made a decision to accept Christ into my life, big life change. But after my salvation experience, I began to go through periods of doubt. So apologetics became very important to me to study through. Somebody would bring up an objection to the faith, and I would have to try to get to the bottom of it and read both sides and think it through. My college career was basically going from one college to another. I went to 3 undergrad schools, 2 graduate schools of different types. And so I studied apologetics avidly until I could work through a lot of these issues. But it wasn't until about 10 years ago that a relative gave me the little book, Heaven is for Real, about the little boy, Colton, who claimed to have had this experience. They wanted me to read it. And I really wasn't very interested because I thought, it's just somebody's testimony. I don't know the family. Why should I believe anything like that? But I read it. There were some good things about the book that were interesting, but again, and it seemed like a sincere family. Again, interesting, but what caught my attention was, I believe it was on the cover or inside cover, a physician said, I study near-death experiences, and this is consistent with the experiences I've seen in my studies. And I thought, somebody's studying this stuff? So I thought I need to get in and see what don't just read popular books. I wanted to see what studies had been done by physicians and intellectuals on near-death experiences to see if they offered any evidence for the afterlife. In all my study, I'd never been exposed to it. So that's basically what got me into the study and looking not just at the popular renditions, but at the studies themselves.
Okay. And so what was it though that, I mean, so that's a lot of research you had to do. I've been reading your book. I'm almost done. So you did a lot of research. And from what I gather, you have really realized that there's a lot of documentation in the medical field and peer-reviewed literature about near-death experiences. Like, it's not just like a religious kind of weirdo kind of thing that people believe in. Like, there's some really serious documentation on this. So what is it that you have found out, like in all your studying, like with the research you've done? Is that right? All the peer-reviewed stuff and everything that it's out there.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. So I found that 1975 is when the first book came out. Moody wrote a book that became very famous, Life After Life, and he documented all these experiences people were having. Now he was kind of from an atheist family, so he was not coming from a Christian background, but he began to find that people were having this experience, but never talking about it because they were afraid people would think they were crazy. So he uncovered something. Now, since 1975, for about the next 35 years, up until 2010, if you looked at it at that time frame, there were probably 55 or so researchers that published over 65 studies. And this was often in technical journals that they were published or books on thousands of experiences. And so I wanted to see what these studies had found. Let's look at the studies that people have done, like a cardiologist would interview his people after they had a cardiac arrest. He would interview their patients. What did he find? Was there any evidence that they were really going to the other side, or was this purely psychological, or what? But I was amazed. And one interesting thing is, this is not coming out of a seminary. It's not pastors doing it. This is typically in universities, professionals that are doing this. And it was just fascinating to find out what they found. So basically, my book is trying to summarize the research and to see if that has some evidence for the afterlife. And I felt like it did.
Well, can you go ahead and describe, like when we say near-death experience, like what do we mean by that exactly? Like, is this, give me the characteristics of it and the common themes that you see in all your research and all these near-death experiences. Like, someone is dead for 10 minutes, clinically speaking, and they resuscitated, or is there a time limit? Like, give me some of the basics of it, or give us some of the basics.
Yeah, well, let me just give you an example because people respond to the reports.
Okay.
Like in my book, I start off with a patient, Pam Reynolds. This is a famous case. You can look it up on YouTube and find some news reports on her detailing it. Very interesting. Pam Reynolds. So she underwent a risky brain surgery that was very unusual at the time, requiring lowering the body temperature to about 50 degrees Fahrenheit and draining all the blood from her head. Okay. So by 3 primary tests, a silent EEG, an unresponsive brainstem, and no blood flow to the brain, she's clinically dead. Yet after the surgery, she reported she was very much alive during the surgery, viewing the procedure from outside her body. So at this point, you say, okay, somebody's claiming they saw their body. What kind of evidence could this be for the afterlife or going outside of your body? Well, she described in accurate detail a conversation that transpired during the surgery and specialized instruments used by the surgeons. And even if her vivid, conscious, out of body experience took place prior to the draining of her blood, still her eyes were taped shut. She was deeply anesthetized, and 100 decibel clicks assaulted her ears over 10 times a second to monitor her brain activity. So Dr. Sabom, who was teaching cardiology at Emory at the time, he heard somebody talk about near-death experiences and said, well, my students don't report these. I just don't believe it. And so the person who was teaching the seminar, a nurse that was doing the seminar, said, well, Dr. Sabom, you're a professional. I'd like to talk to you further about this. Can you just start talking to your patients? Now, he was convinced that there were no bodies, there were no souls coming out of bodies or something like this. So he thought it was crazy. Well, he started talking to his patients, and they started telling him about these experiences that they had while they were in clinical death, which is cessation of breathing and cessation of heartbeat. And he said they shouldn't be having experiences like this. So he decided to do a study, thinking sure that he would find, when he interviewed many of them, that this was all explainable physiologically. But after about a year of study, he thought, these people are coming out of their bodies. Now, the reason he felt that was he divided up his study into 2 groups of patients. One group of patients had had a cardiac arrest and had a near-death experience and seen their body from outside, claimed to. And then the other group had a cardiac arrest but did not have a near-death experience. And so when he asked the people who had had the near-death experience to describe their resuscitation, which he says is very different in different times. It's not exactly like you see it on the movies or TV. The ones who had the near-death experience always got it right. The people who were just guessing at what it was like because they had not had a near-death experience, they always got it wrong. And he concluded, it's a very good book if you want to read it. He determined that these people were really coming out of their bodies. So a classic near-death experience, the typical things, a person comes close to death, could be a car accident, could be a cardiac arrest. They claim that they have come out of their bodies. They look back maybe and see their body, see people in the room, hear things that are going on in the room, hear conversations. They may see a light in the corner of the room, go toward it. They may go through a tunnel. In the other side, they may see angels, different beings. They may see angels on this side of the tunnel. But then they may have their life reviewed by a being of light, which all seem to think is God. And then often toward the end of it, they'll see beautiful landscapes. And then at some point, they may have a conversation as to whether it's their time to go or to stay. And when they decide that it's time that they need to go back for their family or whatever, then they find themselves back in their bodies. Classic near-death experience.
Okay, so the thing is, though, that the problem, the challenge is the reason why these seem so evidentially, like looking at it from an evidential standpoint where they get some serious traction, is because people are recalling factual things that when they're in this state of being separated from their body, they're able to recall information that you're sitting there going, how could they know that, right? Isn't that the big big evidential piece of the puzzle that I'm getting here? I mean, can you give me some examples of that? Like that's what's happening, right?
I
They're
think
called
that,
factual information. They're knowing about something.
well, when my philosophical mind gets a hold of that, I find about 12 different things about near-death experience studies that provide evidence that this is actually an encounter outside of the body and with the afterlife. One of them is the fact that they come out of their bodies, and many are able to describe things that they shouldn't have been able to see. Even if there was some minor something going on in their brain, there was not enough to produce full consciousness or lay down memories. So how did they know these things? So that would certainly be one that's mentioned. And people who do these studies look at those and say, wow, the evidence certainly seems to be that these people are out of their bodies. So that would be one of 12 or 15 different things that to me show that they're probably real.
And what's the other big one for you? Like you say, there's a lot. And what is there anything other specifically it shows you that you think they're real, like the strongest evidential piece in the puzzle? You say there's a bunch of them you have, but what's like
Right.
another one or two?
And again, they've got the PDF, so you
Right.
can't cover it all in 30
Right. No,
minutes.
no. We don't expect to.
So they'll see that. But I just say that some of them that really affect me are.
Oh, you're frozen. There you go.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Am I
Lost you
unfrozen?
there for a second.
Okay.
You froze for a second. Go ahead.
People who are were blind from birth will have a near-death experience, and they will report things that they're seeing that they couldn't have seen with their eyes. They were born blind. The deaf will report hearing, even though their ears could not hear. How would they be hearing? There's the sensation of being realer than real. Okay, now you have to think about this a little philosophically. Get out your philosophical pipe and smoke on it a minute. But I was interviewing one person who he was a minister of men in our church, somebody respected. The pastor said, "Hey, I know you're writing on near-death experiences. Here's a person who went through a bad time in the hospital, a septic, something set into his body. He was in a coma. So after he came out, he told me that he had a near-death experience. Why don't you talk to him?" He said he never tells anybody about it, but maybe he'll tell you. And I said, okay. So I talked to him, and this person had gone to the other side while he was in this coma and met with some angelic creatures, and they had this discussion of whether he should come back or not. And I asked the fellow, I said, what? And this is a respected businessman, probably 50s or 60s at the time. And I said, "Oh, you got your philosophical pipe up there. Thank you so much. I actually have one of those in my bag to show my students." But so I said, "Just how real was this? Was it kind of like a vivid dream, or what was it like?" And he said, "Oh man, it was real." He said, and I asked him later in the conversation, "Just tell me how real it was." And he said, "Oh, it was as real as me sitting across from you now." He said, No, it was more real than this." So often people will say it was realer than real. Now, how do I know now that I am not asleep? When I'm asleep, I think I'm awake. When I wake up, how do I know I'm really awake? Well, it's realer than being asleep. And to these people who have been through the experience, years later, their lives will be transformed because they believe it really happened.
Oh,
So I've never had the experience, but I think I can know that if I had this experience, I'd be saying, no, it was real. So why can't I believe in my future self to go ahead and believe it without experiencing it myself? So I think the realer than real experience, the change of life, shows that to these people, they've thought it through. They're not ignorant people, but they say, no, I was there. And that's been a big point.
okay. So you say in your book that these are not rare. I mean, you have a quote in your book. You say here, studies found 4% of the populations of Germany in the USA reporting the experience of near-death experience. That's 1 out of 25 people, over 9 million Americans. And you also say there seems to be a lot of similarities, common themes in near-death experiences in all cultures. Whether it be a Hindu culture or a Muslim culture, whatever, all across the world. So it's not like there's a westernized version of near-death experiences necessarily. I think there's some common themes. in all these? And what you talk about, maybe there's like a beginning, a middle, and the end in these near-death experiences. Can you elaborate more on that, what you mean by that, like a beginning point, a middle, and an end, kind of like teleological thing going on there? Yeah, what do you mean by that in these experiences?
Yeah, well, there's okay. Many people will say, "Oh, they're just hallucinations, or they're just vivid dreams." And I can tell you that the people who study these, the people that have actually done the interviews and are actually almost all of them are saying, no, they're not vivid dreams. They're not hallucinations. They make the distinction. Now
Mhm.
we're at a point where enough study is done to where you can put together in a meta-analysis to see what these people have come up with. And just through their studies, they would say they're not that. But one thing that distinguishes them from dreams, for example, I chart my dreams almost every morning. I just think through, what did I dream?
You do? Well, good
Well,
for you.
I don't write it down. But I tell you what they are is they're just nonsense kind of strung together. It's just like random procedure of thoughts. When the alarm goes off, I'm in the middle of the conversation, or I'm in the middle of teaching a class that I wasn't prepared for. I don't know if you have these kind of dreams, but it's just
I don't
like,
want to
oh
talk
my
about it.
goodness. Yeah. And so it just stops in the middle of something. Why? Because your dream is not orchestrated like a movie. It's just random stuff going on. Same thing with a hallucination. You're just going along in this hallucination. And then when you wake up, it's in the middle of something. Well,
Right.
I never saw in all of the near-death experiences, I'm sure there's some out there because there are anomalies and everything, but they always had an ending. You would be going along, you would have maybe a life review, and then you would have this conversation, and you would decide, okay, do I want to come back or do I not? Do you need to? And either somebody on the other side says, I know you want to stay, but it's time to go back, or you make a mutual decision, and then you come back. Well, that's unusual. Why didn't you come back in the middle of the life review, halfway through a conversation, or while an angel was in the middle of an interesting conversation? Well, it seems like it's a movie, like you're watching a romantic comedy, and Meg Ryan is, she's fallen in love with a person that she used to hate, and then you come to the end, and they get married or fall in love or commit to each other, and then they end. You don't stop it right in the middle of a conversation. Why? There's a
Mhm.
director. It's purposeful. This is for a reason. And when it ends, the movie ends. So I think it's very significant, and it makes it very much unlike a hallucination or a dream, that it makes sense. It flows. It has an ending.
Hmm. I had a friend that had a near-death experience on the West Coast. I reconnected with him last year, and he was walking across the street in San Diego, and he got knocked real hard by a truck, knocked him right in the air off his feet, and he left his body and looked down and saw his body. And he said that he saw his future in the near-death experience, like he could see his son and his future wife and all this stuff. It changed his life. I mean, it changed his life for. I could tell he's kind of a different person now when I talk to him, because I used to know him for a
In a
long
good
time.
way.
Yeah, well, in a good way, yeah. But that's why I want to ask you this question. What do these near-death experiences bring? Since they can happen to anybody. It's not just religious people. It can be atheists. It can be, a different religion, a different background. It's not just biblical based followers of Jesus. I mean, it could be anybody. So what are some of do you see a pattern that it changes lives? Like people change their entire direction of their life after having one of the experiences? Some do, some don't. Or are they just like, it just happened, it's a mixed bag? Or what do you find a lot of times? How does it change their life?
From what I understand from psychologists who study human happiness and how we're doing with our lives, our satisfaction with life, they'd say something like a close call, like you're going, you almost die. Um, Sometimes that will make a short-term change in your life, but often you just go back eventually to the way you're living, maybe typically. But with a near-death experience, they've done longitudinal studies where they will keep interviewing people maybe decades later. And with these, they find that most of these people tend to claim to have permanent changes. They'll want to, let's say somebody was pretty much a secularist, all they thought was on life was that it's just about making money and getting ahead. One of these I'm talking about grew up in Russia, I believe, under more of a communist regime, was taught atheism. And I'm not saying that all atheists are like that, but he was very much materialistic. That's what he lived for. He had his near-death experience, and he came back saying, this isn't what life's all about. What really counts is helping other people. And typically, this is very typical, people will more gravitate toward helping professions. They'll become more religious. In fact, Sabom, the one at Emory, the cardiologist, he did a study of people in the Atlanta area after their near-death experiences. They wanted to go to church more. They wanted to read their Bibles more. They became more spiritual, became more other-centered. And even studies of people who study near-death experiences, they tend to make changes in their lives. So it's a very, very impactful experience.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering, but I wonder, like atheists, is it's documented like an atheist came out of them, they're now a believer. I mean, it was AJ Ayer.
AJ Ayer.
Yeah, the guy that was the father of logical positivism, and he had some sort of, I guess, near-death experience towards the end of his life. I guess that kind of shook him up a bit. I don't think he became a believer, but it kind of took him to believe there's something more than just what he can empirically verify with his five senses in this world. You know what I mean? So I mean, some people definitely have a changed perspective on everything. So I guess it just probably varies from person to person, obviously. That's obvious.
Let me mention this, though, about the impact and why I think if this is primarily a Christian group that's wanting equipping, one reason that I think you ought to at least delve a bit into near-death experiences, and the reason I would give you a book for free and say at least read this to get the overview. Sure. This is widespread. Within your family and close friends, typically somebody has had an experience like this. And when I talk about it, I teach an intro to religion class, and in it I have that little book, I believe that I gave you, called Faith That's Not Blind.
Right.
I give like 15 arguments for the existence of God. I have my students rank each argument, like the teleological argument, the cosmological argument, all the typical arguments, rank them on a scale of 0 to 10 as to which you think are the most compelling. Now, the interesting thing about that is we tend to have our little pet argument that we think's the most powerful of all. It may be the evidence for the resurrection, or it might be the settings of the universe that grabs us. And sure enough, when you look at it, some people think some of those are the strongest arguments. But there was no, of those 15 arguments, none was a dud. At least one person thought each of those was the strongest argument for them personally. But there were especially a lot of people that gravitated toward near-death experiences, deathbed experiences, and answers to prayer and miracles. Seems like many of them. Now, I'm not sure exactly why that's so powerful, but some of them will say, well, I had an experience, or there was an experience in my family, and I've never told anybody about it, but I could never disbelieve in God or the afterlife after that experience. So 1 out of 25 people, that's a lot. Can I tell you about one example from my family?
Sure.
Okay, so I was writing the book. We had a relative come by. His name's Bucky, and he had taught history for years, had a master's degree, real level-headed, fun guy too, but a person who's just not up for tall tales. He's, there was no reason for him to lie about it. But he said before, he was it. I said, I'm researching on near-death experiences. He said, oh yeah, I've had one of those. In fact, he said he had 3 of them. 2 weren't really near-death experiences, but were supernatural experiences. Near-death experience was this. He was sleeping one night about 3 o'clock in the morning, feels a heavy weight on his chest. He said like something had just fallen on his chest. Came out of his body, saw his body from up above, saw like a tunnel, a light in the corner of the room. There were some angelic-like creatures there. And then he went back. He didn't really have a conversation. It was just one part of the near-death experience. Came back into his body and woke up in a cold sweat, sat on the side of the bed, got a phone call 3 o'clock in the morning from a nurse from several hours away saying his dad had just died of a heart attack. Now, that's called a shared death experience. So when people say, oh, these near-death experiences, they're just caused by a lack of oxygen or too much oxygen or other things. In a shared death experience, Bucky didn't have He didn't have a dying brain. And so I'm looking at this guy that I know that I've met in family meetings over the years, and he's telling me about his experience. Well, in my class, I don't ask them to tell about experiences like that, but many of them, when they choose near-death or deathbed experiences, they'll say, here's the reason, and they'll go through and tell an experience in their own life. And so this is something that's almost like a natural revelation that all of us can look at. And people need some explanation. If you don't know anything about near-death experiences, maybe they're going to go to somebody that's got a more New Age interpretation or a more Eastern interpretation. I think we need to be aware of it because these are very powerful.
Okay, before I get to some of the naturalistic explanations, a few more questions. So you say these are widespread across the world. We know that the New Age movement's still big. You know, I became a believer in 1994. It was big then. It's just as big today as it was ever. Plenty of books out there, New Age teachers, books, higher consciousness, things like that. Wouldn't those kinds of people that believe in some sort of higher power or impersonal force, they can gravitate towards, really latch on to something like this? Like, how do you tailor a near-death experience? Can it be tailored towards the biblical model of God or Jesus? Or is it just kind of for very general? Is it kind of like an appeal to like a New Age person because it's just not any, you know what I mean? It's not like very concrete. You know what I mean? Like, how do you get around that? That's just a New Age thing. Those people want to have those near-death experiences. They're into New Age stuff. Is that something you've heard? Is that true?
I can tell you, if you just kind of read the popular stuff out there, if somebody's a New Age person, they're going to try to find some event in a death experience that seems to go along with their view.
Right.
With anything you study, there are going to be anomalies. There's going to be a 10%, like you're looking at vaccinations for COVID as they're studying those. Well, if 90% of the people are being inoculated and it's working, that's good. But if you bring together all the 10% of anomalies, some women say they got pregnant. Well, I doubt it was because of the shot. You know what I mean? But there are anomalies out there everywhere, and people in various religions will try to pull together some that sound like their religion. But if you just go to the studies themselves and think about it, let's say somebody believes in reincarnation. Well, they think that when you die, you're reincarnated back on Earth. Well, why are these people in near-death experiences seeing deceased relatives who've been dead for 10 years? Why aren't they reincarnated as a grasshopper or a person or something here on Earth? Why are they on the other side? That sounds more consistent with Christianity to me. It's kind of like the transfiguration of Jesus when he saw these Old Testament characters who were still alive on the other side, and he communed with them. So, number one, they're dead, deceased people on the other side. Number two, a lot of New Age people will just say, well, in the afterlife, we just kind of we lose ourselves and we dissolve in the universal consciousness. Well, in a near-death experience, you're there in like hyper consciousness. You know that you're there. You're talking to these other beings who are real beings. When they have their life reviewed by the being of light is personal. He's either talking to you in your language or mind to mind, but these are all personal. So to me, this is very different than what New Age people and others are telling me. I think it fits very well with Christianity if you stick with the big studies and don't just listen to everything you hear on the internet.
You mentioned this life review thing. The first book I ever read, the only other book I've read besides yours on near-death experiences was Imagine Heaven by John Burke. You heard that book? A friend of mine sent this to me last year, and I never even read a book all the way through on near-death experiences, but he said one of the, and maybe you already know this, probably, one of the common themes in all near-death experiences is there is a review of your life of some kind. And the one thing that you seem to be held accountable for the most in all these experiences, he says in his book, is how you treated people. Like the way you related to people, how you treated people. It wasn't so much in these near-death experiences, there was a list of do's and don'ts, how many good things you did, how many bad things you did. It was just very relational, how you related to other people and how you treated them. So that was kind of interesting.
which sounds a lot like when Jesus was asked, what's the most important commandment? Now, if expectations were causing this review, most of us, when we were let off for school, our parents didn't say, okay, now make sure and look for the people that are liked the least and hang out with them, and help the undeserving, and a lot of people, it's usually, hey, make better grades, pull up that math grade. Those are the things that are drilled into most people as they're growing up. You'd think the life review would be about, you could have gotten a lot further along in life than you did. What if you had just, gotten another degree? What if you had really passed school and done well?
Yes.
That would be the things that are big on most people's minds out there. But that's why they're shocked when they get into this type thing, that, oh my goodness, this isn't what really counts. Often people, when they have this life review, they not only see what they've done to other people, good and bad, as far as conversations and what they've done, but they'll actually see what they said from the viewpoint of the other person as to what they were experiencing when you said it or did it. And it's not like a condemnatory thing. It's more of a, hey, this is a lesson. This is something we can learn from. And overwhelmingly, the huge thing that comes out is love. And that's what Jesus said. You look at the commandments, what's the greatest commandment? Love God, love people. And they go and meet a very appealing, loving God on the other side. And their big outcome is often, wow, I need to treat my wife better. I don't even know my children's friends. Why don't I pay more attention to my children and what's important to them? And this is new to a lot of people.
That's what Burke says. He said that their reviews were nothing about how much they had accomplished. Like, yes, I had 6 PhDs, or I made $800 million or 80 million or whatever. It was about their relational aspect of their lives and how they treated people. So that was kind of the eye opener, for a lot of them. But couldn't someone interpret that, if that's what happens in these near-death experiences, a life review, as, well, where does Jesus fit in? I thought I'm good to go with God because I've accepted the Lord into my life, and I'm saved, and so it's not based on what I do now. Now, my theological views on that is, I believe there's 2 judgments. I think there's a judgment seat of Christ for all. You're either going in with God or you're not, based on what Jesus did for you. But there's also a bema seat, the judgment seat of Christ, where you are rewarded for things you did in this life. Rewards and things like that. There's loss, there's gain. So I kind of view the believers having a separate judgment, where they are, kind of held accountable for, some of the things they did and didn't do. But that's not an issue of whether you're going into the kingdom, whether you're going into heaven or not. But that gets into, other theological issues. So it's just kind of interesting. I got a couple more here, then I got to get to some people. People are already putting questions. Let me ask you about the naturalistic expectation. I got to share the screen here. Some of the naturalistic scenarios people come up with how to explain these near-death experiences. One thing that comes up, I just want to show some people an illustration here because I think this will help them. Okay, so for everyone that's kind of new to this, I know that Steve knows about this, but there's a very popular view out there in the world, in the world of what we call neuroscience. Some of you maybe already know about neuroscience, or just in general, that everything's physical. We're just, the mind and the brain are actually identical. They're not separate things, and that basically you're just a glob of matter. There isn't really such a thing as the mind. It's only the activity of the brain. This is sometimes what we call reductive physicalism in the sciences, where everything's reduced down to a physical thing. These are what sometimes atheists believe, or they're called materialists or physicalists. There's different versions of it. But the point is that what we're saying, if these near-death experiences are true, then that means that can't be right, because that means there has to be a difference between the mind and the brain. And what we're saying is, like, what we call a substance dualist view, which is what I kind of hold to, like J.P. Moreland, is that the mind can be separate from the brain. The mind's more the soul or the consciousness that is distinct and can live on or go on apart from our body on some level. Of course, we believe that'll happen when we die. I mean, when we, not talking about near-death experience, just die physically tomorrow, if I die tomorrow. But doesn't near-death experiences kind of put a dent into this view, if it's true? It puts a huge dent into that view, right, Steve? Kind of the physical.
Yes. Now, as I've said, a lot of the people who began these studies were physicalists, basically. I think that's where Van Lommel, a Dutch researcher, put it. He had just been taught that everything had a physical explanation in med school, and he had subscribed to that. When he saw his first near-death experience, he thought, now, wait a minute, this doesn't seem to jibe with what I was taught. So he began to question reductive physicalism because of that. There are many things that make it look like this is something that's going on outside of your body. How are you thinking without your brain? How are you communicating with things outside of your brain? So I
Right.
would say, whether people are believers or not that are studying this, whether they're believers in Christianity, for many, this has at least brought them to the point of saying there's more than just the physical. There's the mental, and it can separate from the brain, and it seems to separate after death, or at least after clinical death.
Right. And so what are some of give us like two of the most common, I know you have them in your book, you list them, but maybe, okay, you've got the naturalistic scenarios. Naturalism meaning that there is no supernatural explanation, like there's just everything's explained naturalistically. What are two of the most common naturalistic explanations for near-death experiences, and how do you respond to those? Like you hear regularly. I've heard a few of them, but why don't you just give a couple, like how people explain them away?
Well, I
Yeah.
mentioned anoxia and hypoxia, which is either too much oxygen on the brain or not enough oxygen on the brain. And some people would say, well, a dying person, obviously they're lacking oxygen, and when people lack oxygen, they hallucinate. And hey, they're thinking about the afterlife anyway because they think they're about to die. So they just have a hallucination that's about what they're expecting. The problem with this, several problems with it, but number one, these things have been studied over and over again. Some patients will actually be having their oxygen levels, they're being monitored at the time that they claim to have had their near-death experience. So there was not an oxygen level problem. Of course, in a shared death experience like Bucky had, he wasn't even dying, and yet he shared this experience simultaneously with his dad that was dying. So that doesn't really help in that case. Others will just say that we'll try to show that everything happens, like you say, with reductionism. Let's say everything that we do when we look at it can be explained by the brain.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what we're thinking, what we're doing. So there's just no evidence of anything else happening, like a mind that's working. And they'll say, hey, look at it this way. You've got a regular person, and then they get Alzheimer's. And then you've got the same person, but their personality changes. Well, now, wait a minute. If what we really are essentially is a mind, then how would our personalities be changing? It just seems like everything we do to the brain impacts what we call mental functions. Now,
Mm-hmm.
the way most people like Van Lommel and others would look at this, they used to be reductionists, but they'd say, okay, let's say that you've got what we used to have, what we call a ghetto blaster. You'd put it up on your shoulder and you'd
Yeah.
have a radio or
Bee Gees all the way.
tapes. There you
Yeah.
go. And that would be, I think, a parallel illustration of this. So let's say that you drop it and one of the components doesn't work, and all of a sudden you get a rattle. Well, okay, then and then you drop it really bad and it doesn't work at all, and you could say, okay, well, obviously that proves that the music is in this thing, because anything I do to this contraption affects the way I'm able to listen to the music or not listen to the music. So therefore, all the music's in the machine. Now we would say, no, 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 that's crazy. The music's coming from way off somewhere, going through audio waves. The ghetto blaster is just a receiver for this. Yes, when you mess with the receiver, you mess with, you know, the quality of the sound, or if you mess with your brain, it can mess with your personality and all these things. But that's just because it's the receiver more of the mind. So in
Mm-hmm.
other words, there is an alternate hypothesis as to why damage to the brain could cause damage to a personality, while these things seem to work without a mind. And even if the mind wasn't really doing much anything different except storing information or whatever during our life, What if it just mainly comes into play during a near-death experience? So I just don't think when people think through these, there are alternate explanations to the things that physicalists bring up. Number one, I think very viable alternatives. And whatever people use to try to destroy near-death experiences as being a real experience outside of the body, typically those have been studied. There's a book, Science and the Afterlife, very good going through those. I detail them in my book, not as much as some of these other books have.
Okay. So one last question. So when it comes to most Christians believe, I think generally speaking, traditionally, that when we die, we're either in we're conscientious of where we are, one of two places. We're either a temporary, heavenly, well, not heaven yet. It's, well, yes. I mean, that is a future judgment, the resurrection. The point is we're in some sort of intermediate state and we're conscious of where we are. It's going to be a good place, or of course it can be the bad place, as we know, a state of separation, a state of nothing good, separate from anything good, or being in a much better place. So do the near-death experiences support both of those people have, both sides? Like they have bad experiences where it seems like I was shown a picture of what they say is hell versus heaven, or is it always heavenly, the kind of thing? Is it both from what you've seen? And
From the very beginning, even with Moody, he acknowledged that some of them were distressing. They've been called distressing near-death experiences. They've been called hellish, and you can look those up. At first, people really tried to minimize those and act like this was just some kind of anomalous something going on and just ignored it. And I'd like to ignore it myself. I think they're really creepy and scary because people just say it's not like they're before a judgmental God that's judging them or torturing them. They just find themselves in a place where God is not. And it's painful, it's separation, it's darkness, it's all the things that we often talk about with hell. There was a cardiologist who studied those not long after Moody wrote his work. He had a patient, Rawlings was his name, and he had a patient who was bringing back to life. He experienced cardiac arrest. He would resuscitate him, and he would say, "You've got to keep me here because every time I go back out, I'm in hell." And then he would get him, resuscitate him, and then he would go back, and then he'd resuscitate him. But some of these patients who experienced that, when he would ask, they would tell about it while they were going through it, and then later they wouldn't even remember it. It's like it was such a horrible memory, they just kind of pushed it in the back of their mind and couldn't deal with it. So Rawlings felt like that maybe these were underreported. I don't know if that's the case or not, but people do report these hellish experiences along with the good ones. So people that try to say that everybody just goes to a good place, I don't think that can be proven through near-death experiences.
Okay. Well, I think the near-death experiences, if they're, if these things are really evidentially true, which it seems like there's good evidence for them, I think it seems to prove more that our view of like an intermediate state of some kind before the final judgment is really a real thing. It's not, some people think, Christian theology, if some people think you just go to sleep and you wake up in the resurrection. Some people think there's different views, but the most traditional view is that we are conscious and aware of where we are the second we take our last breath. And well, I think that's of God or not,
I think that's consistent with Jesus on the cross when he's talking to the thief.
Right.
Cross, when he says, "Today you will be with me in paradise." You're not going to be in some kind of soul sleep until the final resurrection.
Right. Well, I don't believe soul sleep. I'm saying some people do, though.
Right.
It depends. Okay. Well, we had a couple questions here on the chat. Dwayne, you had asked, I kind of already answered the one about NDE, the near-death experience of non-believers be horrible. I think that Steve has agreed that people report bad things, not always good things in these near-death experiences, so they can be bad too. But
let me address that though. That's a deeper question, because one thing about expectations that shows me that it's not based on expectation is you have a lot of atheists who are going and having this heavenly experience. Well, why would they be having this experience on the other side if their expectation of death is boring nothingness, basically?
Hmm.
So I think it speaks to the truth of deathbed experiences that people from lots of religions, lots of beliefs, from atheist to theist, have a similar experience. Why is that? Now, my thing would be, I would say that I don't, this is not the final judgment. This is not their real actual death. I mean, if there's a God, then he knows this is just a halftime experience and not the end of the fourth quarter for
Hmm.
them. I
Hmm.
think God is a good God. I think he gives good gifts to his children and people that aren't his children, according to the Sermon on the Mount. And I think that he gives often people who are in their spiritual journey, or atheists or agnostics or involved in some cult or whatever. He may give them a good experience on the other side to say, listen, there is another side. I think it's more like a vestibule to heaven. It's not really, often they'll say, oh, if I go across this place, I would have to be choosing heaven. I think there's more on the other side than just a heaven and a hell. There's like a prequel to it. The Jews used to believe in like 7 levels of heaven. Uh, Paul talked about being taken to the third heaven where he had an experience. But so I think that it doesn't mean that you're saved just because you have a near-death experience. I think
Hmm.
it means that you come back and, hey, now you're motivated to seek. It
Hmm.
doesn't it doesn't make you do it. It's still your choice. But like when the Apostle Paul had his vision, he wasn't told how to be saved and all that in the vision. He came back and had to find some good people to talk to complete the whole thing. I think the biblical pattern is that people do the sharing of theology and the gospels. This is more like natural revelation that can motivate people to seek.
Hmm. Okay. We kind of covered this already. Dwayne is asking whether the Christians that have these experiences report in their interviews some of the similarities. I think we've touched on that already, right? They have like a review, a beginning, middle, and end of a review of their life kind of thing. Is that kind of where we're going with that, Steve?
You're talking about, do Christians have this experience? I think I missed the question.
Well, he's asking, what do the Christians that have near-death experiences, the ones already in the faith that believe, what
Right.
kind of experiences do they report in their interviews? Are they different than others, or pretty much all across the board the same?
Well, I think if they had a life review and they've been living for the Lord, then they're going to have a lot of more good things in their life review than somebody that was living for themselves, right? So that's going to be, in a sense, different. But I think it's very similar to others in that you go to the other side, you look back and see your body. You may talk to some angelic creatures or like angelic figures or deceased relatives. Um, Really, across the board, people are experiencing many of the same things.
But the point is, though, the common theme is this life review thing, and it's based on relational aspects of your life. It seems that's what Burke talked about, and that's what you're saying. A lot of review going on there. So that's kind of interesting. Okay. So we've got other people in the chat room asking questions. Let's see here. Here's another one. Have a question about, Julie has a question about Ibn Alexander.
Okay.
Ibn Alexander. Julie, are
Yeah,
you
he
going to
might have.
ask it or?
Yeah, he answered part of it. Eben Alexander was a neurosurgeon, and he was declared brain dead, and so he clearly had some unusual experiences, including meeting uh, like an adopted sister. I don't think he knew he had, and when he was in heaven. But he wrote a book, and I mean, I saw him in Oprah and other places, and he just didn't have a his theology was a little off. So I just kind of wondered about that. But now that Steve,
Anything to add to that, Steve?
Yeah, and I've heard him speak as well. Now, he said one thing controversial in his book about that that somebody told him you can't do anything wrong. And he said in the talk, he said, now, when I was saying that, when I got to the other side, they said, don't worry, you can't do anything wrong up here. We wasn't talking about on earth. So I think sometimes he's been misinterpreted a little bit. But I also believe that he was in this state for a long time, kind of comatose, going in and out. And people like that may very well have hallucinations as well as a near-death experience. and get some things confused with each other. That's why I just don't read a lot of books by individuals. I read more of the ones that are in the context of a study of a cardiologist who can more assess things like this. But
I just thought that one was unusual since he was declared brain dead. And since he was a neurosurgeon, before this happened, he thought, just like you said, people have hallucinations and, it's just like wishful thinking and this sort of thing. So
yes, and
I was really into him.
And I think what happened to him was very important. In fact, there was another neurologist at another school who had written a naturalistic book trying to explain away near-death experiences a few years before his. Being at Harvard, that kind of trumped the other guy to me, if you're comparing credentials. But
what was his name?
Nelson wrote the other book.
Okay.
Yes, and I've read it. You can look at it as well. He's just he didn't have a near-death experience. He's just trying to explain them away naturalistically. And in my book, in the appendices, make sure to read the appendices if you read it because they're important. But I do a review of Nelson's book, Blackmore's book Against Near-Death Experiences, some articles. So I deal with some of those there. But his Eben Alexander is really important because it takes a person who is basically thinking reductionist and then brought him over to believing, oh my goodness, there's more to the brain than just physical. And he's a neurologist and he's having to say, hey, I'm having to change the way I thought. And it brought him just that much closer to a biblical worldview.
Yeah, I like what you said where, when somebody comes back that they might be more motivated to seek. So I think that's kind of my prayer for him is that his theology will get sorted out a little bit.
I think that's a good prayer.
Yeah.
All right, so someone has in the chat room, they mentioned Bill Qureshi. He passed away a few years ago of cancer. He said when he was in his procedure for botched treatment for stomach cancer, at some point the pain was so much, he looked up, hovering over his body, and he said he had a near out-of-death body experience. He said, I was watching myself feel that pain. I never heard that part, but that's interesting. That's more of a comment. Is there anything he says here, Ronald asks, in your research, is anything about DMT and what people call clockwork L's come up? I have no idea what it sounds like a Clockwork Orange movie weird thing. But go ahead. What is that? What's he talking about? I have no idea.
We're having a resurgence in hallucinogenics, and a lot of hippie-ish type people are trying to look for the other side with, LSD when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s, and now DMT and other designer drugs that people take. Some people will say, oh, well, hey, it's just like you can induce your own near-death experience through that. I'm not for inducing anything. If passively God wants to give me a near-death experience, that's cool. And I just think it makes you love God more to see that he takes care of us when we're going through the valley of the shadow of death and gets us out of pain, like apparently Qureshi happened to him. But I'm not going to try to replicate this experience or go to a medium and try to conjure up a meeting with someone on the other side. As a believer, I've also got apologetics making me think that the Bible is really the word of God, that Jesus gave us truth. So I'm not going to go those directions. Now, I'm not sure where you were going with that, but some people will say, oh, DMT and near-death experiences are just the same. Well, I just challenge you, don't read an article on comparing NDEs to deathbed experience or
DMT.
Yeah, DMT to near-death experience. Just go read a whole bunch of DMT experiences and then go read a bunch of near-death experiences like on Dr. Long's site, NDERF, NDERF, where people turn in their experiences. You'll see this is very, very different, a very different experience. In fact, I've got an article I could send you if you need it that is doing a comparison in a very intelligent way and showing that this is a very different experience. Now, it may be you're going to the other side sometimes when you take a drug like that, but how do you know if what you're hearing on the other side is generated by malevolent forces or benevolent forces? We believe in both, so I'm scared of trying to get over there myself and just fool around.
Yeah. Charles is asking, does there seem to be a different measure of time, especially in relationship to the amount of time they were clinically dead? That's in the chat room there, if you want to look at it.
There is something different about time. This would go back to one of the many things that show that it's not, to me, consistent with expectations. But if you ask a Christian, what do you expect to happen when you die? Well, you're thinking about Stephen's martyrdom. He looks up, he sees Jesus, standing there to welcome him, into heaven. We're thinking we're going straight to heaven. We don't think, oh, what's going to happen when I die? Well, I'm probably going to come out of my body, meet with a couple of angels, see a deceased relative, we're not expecting that at all. And so, so this is another thing that's unexpected, is time. Inevitably, people get to the other side and say, it was like time didn't exist. Now, I have no idea what that means. I think of time as a succession of events, and surely you're thinking, okay, this happened, this, but they'll say it's just like time stopped. Some would say when they did a life review, they went through their entire lives. Now, that would take a lot of time. And yet they may have only been out for a few minutes or an hour. And yet there's a difference in time. There's also a difference in space that's consistently reported, where there could be somebody far off, but you could just be with them in a moment, or you could see them just like they were right next to you. So there's a difference in time and space, which is not expected, but is a consistent part of the pattern. Does that help? Did that answer that question?
That's fascinating. What about the near-death experience that contradict the Bible? Like there's something in the experience that is blatantly non-biblical. Or some of those experiences you've documented, are they like that, where there's some aspects that are not biblical at all? Like where you go, I don't know what that's about, or what do you say to those if they're there?
Well, I don't find that many unbiblical ones when I read the studies of near-death experiences and they report on a bunch of cardiac patients, for example. I don't find much. Now in the popular literature, you'll hear people talk about, oh, well, I went to the other side and God said that I had past lives, or that I was there during the creation of the world, or that I'm a God, and you'll have all kinds of things. And that's kind of when I was getting to the inoculations and whatever, that you're always expecting to have anomalies in any study. And particularly if somebody's at a time of death, you're going to have some people who have some hallucinations. You're going to have some people that nobody knows has some real mental issues. And I have a lady that I talked to sometime. I think she had a real legitimate near-death experience early in her life, but then she starts talking about more experiences, and you start saying, man, this sounds like a form of schizophrenia, to where you're hearing voices that aren't there. So a certain number are going to be hallucinating. Some are going to have mental illness. All those get thrown into the mix, which is why we go with a 90%. And then where there shouldn't be any kind of a pattern at all, if they're just hallucinating, why is there this pattern among the 90%? Just because somebody comes back and starts giving false theology doesn't throw out all the rest. So if there are good miracles according to the Bible, there's some people who imitate miracles, like in the Old Testament we saw, with the Pharaoh's group there. There are true prophets, there are false prophets. We have to be discerning between them and not just believe anything we hear.
Sure. Georgia has this question in your radio transmission analogy. She says, so it's in the chat room here, it's getting here. The brain, for a brain damaged person, does that mean each person has a unique frequency? Otherwise, their transmissions outside the body would be able to be heard or intercepted by other functioning people. That's in the chat room. Do you see that one?
Well, I think I would put frequency in quotation marks, because if we're talking about a non-corporeal existence, we don't even know what some of these waves are. Are they particles or waves, or what? Waves, I assume. But it may be something totally different operating. But I think that would be a good analogy, that we are on a different frequency and can understand, our brain understands things that its mind is doing.
Okay. Chris, you've asked a couple questions we just have been addressing. How do we discern true and false and near-death experience claims? We just were talking about that. some people describe hell like Dante's Inferno. Well, see, they've already got that picture in their mind from the, culture, right? Giant spiders, pits, monsters. Others have apparently lied about going to heaven. Wasn't one of the movie that got made that was kind of based on a farce or something? The boy, what was the
No,
story?
people, I don't think anything's been found fictitious about heaven is for real.
Heaven is for real.
Might be, but from everything I've seen, they seem like decent people, and nothing's been found out to the contrary. There was another book about a little boy who had a near-death experience. It was apparently fabricated and pushed by the father and the son. Malarkey was his name. Interestingly, somebody should have thought maybe there's a question here. But I'm pretty sure the name was Malarkey, and the son later came out and said, no, this never really happened. We just did it for the money, and Dad pushed it on me.
Okay, so there have been
so
some...
we have to be. That's why you just don't take somebody's testimony. The Bible says not believe everything you hear. Test the spirits to see if they're true. And you have 2 or 3 witnesses through the Bible. You don't just accept a testimony because the person seems sincere.
Right. Someone's asking about alien abductions. I don't think that has a lot to do with NDEs, though. Alien, that's a totally different
I'll just say I've never had it happen to me, and I've never really studied it. So I'll just plead ignorance there.
Okay. Carla, do you want to ask this question verbally, or do you want me to repeat it? Everyone's doing chat room tonight. I don't know what's going on. Are you guys just lazy? Or no, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
We want to hear your voice. Come on.
Okay. Hey, thanks so much for being with us tonight. Yeah, and thanks for sharing that book. I've got the Rawlings book as well. I was asking about your appendix 1, where you talked about the experiences across cultures. And I was asking if that appendix kind of argued for more of the inclusivist, wider hope view, since it didn't appear that any of those international folks that came back mentioned Christianity or the need to seek Jesus, or, like there were things maybe about some life review and this and that, but it kind of made it sound like if their experiences were so similar, and of course I don't know what the gospel witness was like in their life after that or whatever, but yeah, it just seems like it kind of sounds pretty inclusivist.
Yeah, I'm just going to say that I do not think that a near-death experience is telling somebody whether they're ultimately saved or not. Again, it's kind of like a halftime experience rather than the end of the 4th quarter. I think these things happen to believers, to non-believers, to seekers, to all kinds of people. Just like when Jesus was alive, not everybody saw him. Some people did, and they got to see Jesus' miracles. Not everybody did, but it didn't mean that just because they saw Jesus personally that they were a believer. And I think in the same way, a near-death experience is just natural revelation. It's very it's very common, 4% of the populations. And in that appendix number 1, I talk about the similarities. So you'll have somebody in a Muslim culture in India that's and they go up and they see this benevolent God. Well, that's wonderful, and that's general revelation, just like they could get from looking at a leaf and saying this thing's too marvelous to have just happened naturalistically. I think there's a God. So I take it as natural revelation, not something that's saying, oh, all religions are the same or everybody goes to heaven. I think it jumpstarts people seeking to realize there's something else to life. And so from that perspective, and the perspective that in the Bible, usually, again, the Apostle Paul, when he had his vision, he didn't get theologically straightened out through the vision. He just got pointed to people on earth who were able to complete the story for them.
Okay. I have a million more questions, but I'll let someone else go.
Go ahead, Carla. Ask another one. There's nobody in the chat room. If you want to ask another one, go ahead.
Okay. Well, isn't it true in the Rawlings book there were some people that initially saw the light, but then things got darker as it went on? Because, like you said, he shares some distressing experiences as well, right?
It's been so long since I read Rawlings. And his was not as much of a study as it was just his observations. So I paid more attention to people like Sabom and Van Lommel and others that were actually doing a study. So, but yes,
Okay.
I've heard of people saying that they had a good one that eventually went bad. Maybe those are legitimate ones. Maybe they're not. I don't really know the percentage of those that happen.
Okay, and then something else that I've read on, I think more than one occasion, is people, even if they didn't believe in God or whatever, they have seen beings in their hospital room or perhaps right outside their nursing home window or whatever, distressing beings that seem to be waiting for them. And also, in the distressing experiences, just I've read, the testimony of how the beings seem playful at first, but then by the end, when they're going through the tunnel, they're biting and tearing their flesh and things like that. Have you read much about people kind of where the veil is pulled back before they've actually coded or whatever and seen what others can't see?
Well, there are two different types of experiences, generally speaking. There's the near-death experience where a person recovers from it. There's a
Mhm.
deathbed experience where a person is actually in the process of their final death, and that's distinguished from a near-death experience. It's a different type of experience, but I believe there's nothing contradictory about the two. But I have seen people who are dying who were seeing, yes, the things that you described, and it's very scary. So some will see demonic type things going on, others will see angelic type things.
Okay, and I'm sorry to just ask one last question. One of our pastors, I know he had had experiences with astral projection, um, and I also I came upon a scene of a woman who had had an accident with a knife, and she actually saw her body. She was like kind of above in the kitchen, looking down on her body. She wasn't dead yet, and I know this pastor. He felt like he was able to leave his body and to go to other places or whatever. And so I know it's not exactly the same thing, but don't you think if these were documented, like if someone could go to another room and tell you what was in someone's room across the city and what they were talking about on the phone or whatever, do you think that we could use those type of circumstances as well as NDEs to prove kind of separation between the mind and the brain?
If it could be shown, and honestly, I've not really studied astral projection. I've read some on it. Some of the things that I've seen on that, I think there is a natural body reaction to somebody who's in severe pain, childbirth, or whatever. They may feel like they've dissociated from their body, and that helps them to deal with the pain.
Hmm.
Um, and then some people claim that they can just make this happen on their own. Some studies that I've seen showed that they weren't really seeing what was actually there, that this was something going on in their minds. I think
Okay.
this is a very different experience than that of a near-death experience, although there's some similarities there, of course. But I'm not sold on that being a real experience. Maybe I just haven't studied it that much.
Okay. Thanks so much. Thanks for your time. It's fascinating.
Steve,
Uh,
what that name of the Rawlings book, is that Maurice Rawlings, to hell, the hell thing, to hell and back? Is that the one you're talking about?
it
I
is
keep saying
Maurice.
Rawlings.
It is Maurice Rawlings, and
Yeah,
I'd have to
that's it.
look back here and see which book it was, because I think, yeah, To Hell and Back, Life After Death.
Yeah, here it is. I got it. Okay. Oh boy, that's a nice website he has. Ooh, that's just that that is a scary website. Looks
I
like
haven't,
a
haven't looked at it.
Halloween play I took people to about hell years ago. Like when I was like
Oh
a
my
new
goodness.
believer. I mean, I was like, brand new believer. Someone took me to one of those hell plays. Oh, that book. I used to have that book. I don't know where it went. Anyway, I remember it now. Okay, yeah, that's the book then. All right, Julie was asking about that in the chat room. So you thought that's a legit book. You like that book?
Well, I think it gave a perspective that others didn't have at the time. Everybody was talking about the positive things. Then they'd mention in a paragraph, they would say, "Oh, there are hellish and distressing experiences too," but kind of gloss over it. Whereas Rawlings kind of hit it head first. Said, "Well, no, wait a minute. These are significant experiences. It's not all just nice stuff and angels and whatever." So I think it was important that, but I don't think Rawlings did as rigorous a study. He just kind of reported some experiences unlike some of the people after him that had done more rigorous studies. So I've just not paid as much attention to him as I have to Sawbohm and others.
Okay. Gary Habermas was debating Michael Shermer once. Michael Shermer's the atheist, and Gary brought up the near-death experiences as evidence for God. And Michael Shermer said, well, I can't change my entire worldview based on just a few things, like a few experiences people had. And Gary's like, wait a minute, you don't know how many documented cases there really are. There's like thousands and thousands and thousands. And Shermer just seemed to be ignorant, how many cases had really been documented in peer-reviewed literature. So
yes, most of the books that I see written against near-death experiences, Christians that write against near-death experiences, typically they've not read the literature. Typically they're talking about some popular books that are out there that may be spreading false theology, and so they dismiss the whole thing because of those books. I don't see any indication that they've actually gone in and studied the serious research. Same thing with secular people that are against them. I'll read them, and I try to read, the guys that are men and women, Susan Blackmore, others that argue against them, to see what they say. But typically, I don't see them dealing with the research. And Blackmore is actually better than others in that, but she was writing so many years ago that she wasn't able to take into account a lot of it. But yes, Shermer and others. Shermer wrote a book on the afterlife, Downing the Afterlife. I read it. It's like, have you even read these studies? You're claiming to be an authority. You're claiming that you're going to look at the science of the afterlife, but you didn't look at the scientific studies that have been done of near-death or deathbed experiences. And there have been extensive studies.
Well, if Jesus rose from the dead, that case is settled, but Michael's not open to that because it's a miracle. Ronald, do you have a question? And then maybe just a couple more. I think we have Georgia. Go ahead, Ronald. What's your question?
Yes. It sounds like a lot of the cases we're talking about seem to be self-reported. As it comes, like, how many cases do we actually have where it was like verified? We talked about like with the doctor who, like, the person described what was going on in the hospital around them in very technical terms.
Yes, I don't know the number of those, but people do take those into account and explain them and tell why they believe these are real based on enough of these where people are actually talking about things that they saw happen in a room. So there's a lot of those out there. I think if you read my book, I've actually got some listed in an appendix where I say, hey, here are some that can verify they were outside of their bodies because of this or that or what they saw. I don't know the number right off, but it's interesting that most of these people start off like Sawbohm or Van Lommel or others, Moody. They start off questioning all this and not thinking there's anything to it. But once they begin actually interviewing people themselves, and like with my relative Bucky, how in the world did that happen at exactly the same time that his father died? The timing of it. In fact, Shermer had an experience similar to that you all ought to read. It's in what isn't it, Scientific American, where he had the long time column. But he said this column got more input than any of his others, and he had actually had an experience with his newly married wife. He just married. That would qualify as a deathbed experience, experiencing a deceased relative. Very interesting, coming from a secularist who's argued against these things all of his life. But basically in the end, he says, well, there's some scientific explanation, even though we don't know it, and so, but I'm sorry, Ronald, I hope I didn't avoid your question, but I think if you read my book, it'll key you into a lot of these, into why these people came from not believing that people were really out of their bodies to in the end saying, ooh, this evidence was really strong. Like Sawbohm would be one. Sawbohm, I always say it wrong.
Yeah, also you need to, if I don't have your email, everybody, you're not gonna be able to get a copy of his book because I sent out the PDF today to everyone was on the email. So
yeah, so you got a free copy. And also now you're going to put it up on YouTube
Well,
Will
the
we be
clip
able-
will be on YouTube, yeah, soon. Yeah,
The
over the next 24 hours, yeah.
The clip, you mean the whole thing, or
This thing tonight we're doing, this
thing?
part.
Okay, will we be able to, if people have further questions, can I answer them on that site?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, people can go on there and ask questions on that clip, yeah, if they want to. Because it looks like people are just going to keep asking questions. So
Well,
someone's
what a wonderful
fine.
group that people
Yeah,
are
yeah,
asking these
no,
questions.
it's fine. That's why we're here. No. So Satan can disguise himself as an angel of light. How many folks are being deceived by love? It's really not love. It's just a deception. I think we kind of talked about that a little bit, but some of these experiences obviously look like that. They could be a deception. You know what I mean? Depends on who it is. They're different, right? For each person.
Yes,
Right.
and I believe there are deceptions as well as legitimate ones. Just like a person who's claiming that they're hearing a voice from God, there may be a real prophet, but there are false prophets. So we need to be discerning and not believe everything we hear. Even if the person seems real sincere, even if the person claims to be a pastor, we need to be discerning.
Right. Okay. Richard, did you want to say something about your unusual experience?
When my wife was younger and into our early marriage, she said she could come out of her body in a very controlled way when she needed perspective on something that was going on. And it allowed her to kind of view things as an outside observer. And she lost that ability later on. So you ever heard anything like that?
You know, again, I've just not studied the astral projection and people who claim to be able to do that. Again, I've seen some studies where when people claimed they could do that, when they would get in a controlled situation and ask them if what they saw, sometimes they were wrong. But that's just like one or two studies. I've not done a big study. Maybe there's more evidence than I've seen.
All right, thanks.
Cool.
But I think it's good to talk about these things among our relatives and friends. I think that naturalism has been so strong in the 1900s that, as Strobel once said, he had a little section in his book on miracles where he talked about being embarrassed by the supernatural. And I have been shocked as I don't even ask people about it. Sherry, my wife, will just say, hey, tell so-and-so what you're studying. And I'll tell them and they'll say, oh, let me tell you about my experience.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, these are sometimes secular people that I wouldn't even think thought about spiritual things. And then they'll tell me about some wild experience. And I'll think, isn't it a shame that we in our Western culture won't talk about these things?
Yeah, right.
They're important.
Yep.
Okay, let's see here. I think we have just a couple more here. Oh, thank you. Someone sent their email. I'll get that. I can't see the bottom of the chat. Oh, can you comment on Saul? Oh, the experience with Saul with the witch. Yeah. So I've read different accounts on that one. What's going on there? Some say it's a vision. Some say it's obviously a literal, Saul seeing Samuel. The general view, right, Steve, is that Saul's making a mistake by going after a dead Samuel.
Yes.
So what's your thoughts on that passage?
Well, it's been a long time since I visited that one, and I never really studied it in depth. So I better not make a comment on it. My general impression was he shouldn't have been going that direction in the first place. And a general principle of his interpretation is that just because something happened in the Bible doesn't mean that that's a command that we're all to replicate, or it doesn't mean that it was good and should be replicated by everyone. Does not imply ought. And some people will look at a situation and say, oh, well, it's in the Bible. And say, yeah, but did the Bible say that everyone was supposed to do this? And if the Bible itself does not interpret it for us, then I think we're left with a lot of guesses. That's my general thought on that passage.
Let me say one thing. I saw a movie years ago they made off that passage. You know who played Samuel, the dead Samuel? Leonard Nimoy, Spock.
Oh,
so
really?
If you ever want to see the best person to play a dead Samuel, of course, Leonard Nimoy was Jewish, by the way. So, it was just great seeing Leonard Nimoy come up out of the ground and saying to Saul, why are you bothering me? I'm asleep. Anyway, so it was very interesting. Michelle, we had a Jewish woman in our meetings who had an out-of-body experience. As a result, she knows there's life after death, but does not believe Jesus is the Messiah yet. Well, maybe that's that first step, getting her hopefully thinking about it. I know, Michelle, you'll be the one to talk to her about it because that's what you are good at. So,
And I think a lot of our, I believe in a cumulative case, and this is just one part of it. But if someone looks at the beginning of the universe and says, wow, that got me to saying that there must be somebody smart and powerful behind this whole thing, we've taken them so far. Now I think we need to keep praying for and working with these people. And I think near-death experiences adds another element to take people further. And just because someone experiences one doesn't mean that it's going to take them all the way, but maybe it makes them seek. Hopefully they'll go further. Can I read one experience to you? It takes about 2 minutes.
sure.
Maybe this was timely, but my students in my religion class were just reading the book of 15 different lines of argument for the existence of God. And this one said, well, the most powerful one to me is Deathbed Experiences. That's my next book. I think I sent it to you as well. If any
Yes,
of you
you
could
did.
read it
I'd
and
send
give
them
me,
out.
if you can give me candid input. So this is on the experience where people prior to death, they're dying. Maybe they're in a hospice and they have an experience. But this student of mine just yesterday said, the strongest evidence for me is that of the deathbed experience. I've seen this firsthand. My papa was my favorite person in the whole world. He had been sick for 9 months battling lung cancer. He had made a decision to enter a hospice facility knowing that the end was near. He explained it to me. He didn't want my nanny to remember the home where they shared a place. That's where she lost him. He'd grown very ill. Each breath was labored. Okay, so oops, I lost my place here. Here we go. He'd grown very ill. Each breath was labored. He was on strong painkillers that rendered him incoherent. The doctor had explained to us that his organs were shutting down due to lack of oxygen. He could not talk to us. We could talk to him. That afternoon, he left this world for heaven. I happened to be sitting by his bed holding his hand. He had not said anything that made any sense that day until he sat straight up in his bed. He looked at me with an excitement and wonder in his eyes I'd never seen before. He said, Grace, can you see it? And I said, Papa, what are you talking about? Tears began to run down his face as he explained how beautiful and amazing this place was. He explained to me that he didn't have the words to describe where he would be going. It was more beautiful than he had ever imagined. He looked at me and said, let's go. It's beautiful. I can't stay here anymore. I want to go there. He got up from his bed, something I'd not seen him do in days, took my hand and said, if we just make it across the ledge, we'll be in paradise. I tried my best to get him back in bed, but he insisted all he wanted to do was to make it over the ledge and tried to make me understand. By this point, I'd hit the call button, got the nurse in, she storms in, gets him back into his bed. He reluctantly lays back down. He looked at me in the eyes and said, don't cry for me, Grace, because if you could see what I see, there will be no tears. There'll be only joy. Take care of your nanny. Tell her I'll be waiting. And then he took his final breath and died. Now, these are things that my students share unprovoked. I don't say, hey, if you've had any experiences like this, share them. But you can see that this is not just an intellectual argument. These are very widespread. In fact, in a New York hospice, they started asking patients every day whether they were having vivid dreams or visions like this. Over 80% of the dying were reporting them. So I think we need to be talking about these. What do we make of these? This was very important to her and maybe why she's studying, I believe, nursing right now in a helping profession. And many of my students say these are the most impactful arguments to them. If there's something there, we need to study them. And when people share them with us, we need to ask them more about them, not just turn away in embarrassment, but to find out what people are experiencing that's impacting them so greatly.
Yeah, Carla mentioned in the chat room that some of these experiences, a lot of talk about different colors. Colors are never, they see these other colors they've never seen before. Burke talks about that in his book. I know he had a lot of testimonies. He talked about that, the colors.
Yeah, they'll talk about colors they have never seen on Earth, maybe were over there.
Right. So
yeah.
that's so funny. I remember that reading the Burke thing. Okay. And yeah, so, and look at Michelle said, I was at the bedside of a Jewish believer who said she saw a stairway to heaven. Was she singing the Led Zeppelin song or not? Anyway, No, she saw it. So, no, yeah, I living with a 92, just for your own information, I'm living with a 92-year-old elderly father I know, living for 3 years. My mom's in hospice, and he simply, I heard him on the phone the other day talking to his friend, said there's no credible evidence for the afterlife. Here he is, 92 years old. And he has been to all our apologetic presentations on he's been to a few of them. He saw Frank Turek speak, James Warner Wallace, had truth thrown at him right and left, heard all kinds. He still is just, just stubborn. So it's too bad. I would think he would need a near-death experience at this point, but we keep praying for him. He goes, well, I don't know why I'm still here in this world. Why am I still here? I'm like, well, Dad, maybe God is showing you mercy. Still in good health too.
I think God is patient. He's patient,
Right.
according to the Bible. And some people at the end of life, he gives them one more opportunity to think about these things and to say, okay, I'm here. I'm a loving God. I'm here. And maybe there in those last moments, they get one last chance.
Who knows? Well, so you would use, to wrap this up, you would use near-death experiences like everyone else would probably as part of a cumulative case for God. It wouldn't, it's not like just one piece, it goes together with everything, all the other things. But you said that little book you give out to your students, they say the argument that they find most interesting and persuasive is near-death experiences. They're more interested in that than any other one.
No, I didn't say that exactly. I would say that none of those arguments are duds. Like you'll have one student who will relate to the argument from morality and objective morals,
Right.
and they'll say, "Oh, that is just the most powerful to me for some reason." And then you'll have the next student that'll give that one a 0 and say, "I don't even get it. That just doesn't impact me at all." And then you'll have another one that'll say the beginning of the universe. Well, how could it have started from nothing? There must be a God. And then another one will say, oh, I don't know. Science will figure that out one day. And so none of them are duds, which means we're all different. We have different experiences. We weigh things differently. But if you look at the number of 10s, 0 to 10, and the people who say this is the most important to me, there are a lot, I would say more, probably most, the most 10s or the most 8 to 10s would come with that, with near death, deathbed experiences, and miracles and answered prayer. Those would, and I just actually tabulate about 80 of my students, but I've continued to do this through the years. Now I've got hundreds, so I need to tabulate them. And I think we need to do that. A lot of times we think that the argument that's most impressive to us is naturally going to be the most impressive to somebody else. And that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah. Well, it's, I do, since I do student ministry, I was just wondering what the things you see that's kind of interesting. Yeah, I agree. Not everybody gravitates the same thing. It just depends on the person. Yeah, somebody here had an experience here. As a child, I experienced several occasions I was asleep, suddenly awakened with the experience of my spirit leaving my body and hovering around the ceiling. This happened several times. I remember it like it was yesterday. Yeah, I've heard that before. I've heard people having that experience, but well, it just, I mean, it just shows how wide these things, how wide and broad these things happen, across the world. A lot of people have these. Well,
Eric.
Yeah, bye.
Yes, I don't know if you missed it, but Chris made a comment that he has a personal experience he'd like to share. I'd like to hear it.
Oh, okay.
If he's still on.
Yeah, I'm still here. Can you hear me?
Hey, Chris.
Hello.
You never told me about this. Go ahead.
All right. Well,
I'm mad now. I'm leaving. Go ahead.
Okay. So I had gone to an Orthodox church, and after that, I was lying down on my bed at nighttime going to sleep, and just as soon as I fell, right, when you're falling asleep, you're not quite asleep, but you're not quite awake. I was all of a sudden I was in this place where there was like a glass dome, and the glass dome was separated by these golden archways, like about 6 of them. And a friend later told me that I was describing the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, not Istanbul. Constantinople. We don't recognize it. Anyway, so I was in this this glass dome with these golden buttresses, and Christ was descending from the top, and his skin was pure bronze, and I could see his feet, and he was drawing me up towards himself like a magnet. And I could see the folds of his robes. He was wearing two robes because I could see both folds of his robes, white robes and bronze colored skin. And I couldn't see his face, but I was about to see his face. But I knew that he knew everything. I knew that this is the one who sees all and knows all. It was like all knowledge of all things was before him. And I felt love. I've never felt so much love in my entire life. I felt like I was being drawn into him like a magnet, and I felt love and peace and joy, and like all the longings of my heart were met in that moment. And it seemed like I was, that moment only lasted as long as it takes to blink your eye. Just a flash of a second, but it felt like I was there. It felt like this is what eternity is like, because there was no time. It was just, I was like in this eternal present. And this crazy, amazing experience. And I was just wondering if the experiences that you've read about, if there's any like similar, if there's like a common theme there or anything like that.
Many people claim to have seen Jesus on the other side. Many people will say when they see the being of light, some would say that is Jesus or God, or what part of the Trinity, I'm not really sure. They tend to say they knew that he could see right through them and see everything about them and knew everything. Often their own minds were open to where it seems like maybe the brain is more of a limiter, and when they're outside of their brain, they could actually speak mind to mind without having to use language or whatever, and knew more. Was it realer than real to you? I mean, to this day, can you look back and see the whole thing, like play it back?
Yeah, so it was realer than real.
Yeah. Okay.
Chris,
so
what
I
you
think
said
so. That may not be a
similar to
near-death
that.
experience since you weren't near death.
No, I wasn't.
But it might have been a vision. And I actually talked to a fellow faculty member who had a similar experience with Jesus on the end of his bed. And I didn't get to ask him a lot about it, but I think sometimes God gives people visions, and that's impacted you to this day. I assume that you'd say, well, I've seen it. There is something on the other side. This life is not all there is. So I think it had a positive impact on your life, which is, again, consistent with near-death experiences. Thanks for sharing that. I appreciate it.
Sure.
But Steve, Chris's experience sounds just like my friend John's, the guy that had the out-of-body experience out on the West Coast. He said he felt like the love, that thing was so powerful, he just couldn't even, just like Chris said, it's almost identical to how he described his experience.
Yeah, if you read my book, make sure to make it through at least that first appendix on love, because this is the most extraordinary. People will go to the other side and they'll say even the buildings and things that they saw on the other side were just infused with love. It's like love just comes out of these experiences, and I'm glad you just reinforced it. In other words, think about what we're doing. If you come out of anything practical with this, we go through school. You're going through Ohio State. What is the other school you're working with?
Columbus State's a community college, but we have people here from different backgrounds too. Not all from there. Yeah.
Okay, but you're going to school. You're wanting to do good, and everybody's telling you do good in school, do your work. But and that's good stuff. I'm a professor. I want you to do good in your classes. But what if the main reason you're there is to love somebody that nobody else is paying attention to? What if you had your life review today what people have you impacted? Do you write home? Do you talk to your parents or your grandparents that never hear from anybody? I think those are the type things when Jesus said it's about love. You know, this is the main thing I want you doing down here. Yes, get your theology straight and all that, but as far as what to practice, what to do, it's not about having the biggest ministry everywhere if you don't love the person that's next to you. And if you can't have the patience to help that little brother or sister that's really annoying to you, maybe those are more important than making an A and doing the best in your class.
That's the thing that when I read that book by Burke last year, I just read it last fall. That's the thing that got to me at the end. He said, wow, the life review is about our relational aspects. It's all relational. I thought, well, God's Trinitarian. He's relational. So maybe that's why he stresses the relational aspects. He's so concerned about that in our lives. You know, it's not so much about how much we accomplish, how many degrees we have, how much money we have. It was about relationships. That's the common theme I saw in these people that had those near-death experiences, that they saw in their life review is how they treated people. So
and isn't it great that it's about love? Because that's something we can all do. None of us are smart enough to be the A student or to get the PhD or do whatever. None of us can, you know, our businesses are not going to do great. Now, not all of our, you know, relationships are going to work, you know, but if you can be the one that's loving, if you're the one that's doing that, then you become successful in what really matters.
And the other thing as we wrap up, Steve, is we don't realize how quick everything just goes in this life. It's just boom, gone.
Oh my
you know,
goodness.
just before we know it, just standing before the Lord and boom, you know, we, you know, it's just, you just have no control over that. And this last year with COVID, a lot of people, you know, realize that it's just so fast, you know, boom, gone. So it's just, we got to be ready and get other people hopefully thinking about being ready.
Hey,
So,
just thank you so much for what you're doing.
Yeah.
For Ratio Christi, again, I went through so many ups and downs with doubts early in life. I needed people like you, ministries like yours. Those are things that the Spirit used to keep me in the fold, and I appreciate it. Thanks for all of you that are involved.
Yeah, they're nationwide. We have a lot of chapters on campuses. As you know, you're involved in the one down there, and we just try to help people have some bricks in their foundation to pull from. You know, they need those foundation points instead of, because they have emotional doubt or intellectual doubt or whatever it is. You know, everybody goes through that. You know, they have to have some things to fall back on. So we're just one brick in the building, hopefully. Well, listen, thank you for coming. Appreciate your time. And thank you so much for your generosity in giving us the PDF of your book and some other materials I just got today I have to send out. So we really, really appreciate it. And we'll definitely be following you. I also, please get his book on that critical thinking stuff. The link I put in the chat room here, they got it. I can send it out later, but they figured out where it is. But that's a fascinating book, and I really appreciate that one too. So just thank you, Dr. Miller, and thank you for your help personally, and I'll follow up with you by email.
Yeah, send me a link. Send me a link to your YouTube channel or whatever.
Yeah. It'll be downloaded tonight.
We can carry on some discussions.
Yeah. If you guys have more questions, just comment on the YouTube link, and he can dive in there. And I post it all on social media. Some people get on there, others don't. You know, I'm not Frank Turek or Mike Lacone. I got like 80 million followers. You know, everyone just waiting for something to go up. You know, so you can get in there and chat. But we appreciate you so much. And let's pray, and we'll head out of here. Lord, just thank you for this time. Help us, literally, Lord, to live in light of eternity. Help us to realize how short this life is, God, and help us to communicate the gospel to others. And thank you for Dr. Miller. May you bless him in his being a professor on this campus, and help him to be used by you, use his books and his resources to get people thinking about you, and that there's more to life than just, you know, the material world, God. And I just thank you for just tonight and everyone that opened up, and how important this is. And may we treat people the way you would treat them as well. And we pray this all in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much. I will definitely follow up the clip, and see you next week. God bless you all. Okay. Thank you, Steve. I'll be in touch. Follow up. Thank you.
Thank you.
All righty.